The confrontation had been building for weeks. Rumours were already circulating that Reform UK was preparing a direct challenge to Labour's immigration stance. But no one expected the strike to be this public, this bold, and this meticulously timed. On live TV, during what was meant to be a standard political debate, Tice waited until the perfect moment, and then, without hesitation, delivered his revelation. As of this moment, he said, migrants are being moved to Labour and Lib Dem run councils. If you think it's right for towns in Kent, Dover and the Midlands to take the pressure, then your strongholds can share the burden too. The audience gasped, the moderators froze, and all eyes turned to Starmer. For a few seconds, he didn't speak. The silence was more telling than any rebuttal. Starmer had been cornered in front of millions. The cameras zoomed in on his face, capturing the flicker of shock, the tightening of the jaw, the moment his usual political armour cracked. It was the perfect storm for Tice. A trap set in plain sight, sprung at the exact moment Starmer was least prepared to counter it. Outside the studio, the impact was immediate. Social media erupted with clips of the exchange. Within minutes, hashtags like Ianad Starmer trapped and hashtag Tice move were trending nationwide. Supporters of Tice hailed it as a masterstroke, while Labour loyalists scrambled to contain the fallout. Videos began circulating of buses pulling into certain boroughs, unloading groups of migrants with suitcases and plastic bags. Whether these arrivals had been planned for days or were part of Tice's dramatic stunt didn't matter. The visual was all people needed to believe that the relocation was real and already happening. In Labour and Lib Dem council areas, shock turned to outrage. Local leaders, many of whom had championed more generous immigration policies, suddenly found themselves in the spotlight. Questions flew from residents. Why here? Why now? Were we even consulted? The arrival of migrants in these neighbourhoods was not met with violence, but with a tense, uneasy atmosphere. Some offered food and blankets, others muttered about overcrowding and stretched public services. Back in the political arena, Starmer tried to regain control. He insisted that immigration policy should be handled responsibly and with fairness, accusing Tice of turning vulnerable people into political pawns. But the damage was done. The optics of being blindsided on live television were devastating. Every headline focused on the trap, the stunned reaction, and the fact that Tice had dictated the conversation from start to finish. Analysts were quick to call it one of the most humiliating moments in Starmer's recent career. This wasn't just a debate win, one political commentator said. This was a public relations ambush. And as the broadcast ended, the real chaos began. Because Tice's announcement wasn't just a talking point. Behind the scenes, there were already movements in play, decisions being made that could escalate the situation beyond words. Starmer might have thought the segment was over, but the political game had just entered a far more dangerous phase. The morning after the broadcast, the political temperature had risen to boiling point. Newspapers splashed the headline across their front pages, each with a freeze frame of Starmer's stunned expression. Radio shows buzzed with callers either praising Richard Tice's boldness or condemning the stunt as reckless and divisive. In the corridors of Westminster, MPs huddled in tense groups, whispering about the fallout and speculating on what this meant for Labour's credibility. In Labour-held boroughs, the reality of Tice's announcement was starting to materialise. Reports confirmed that groups of migrants were arriving in certain council districts. Hotels, community centres, and temporary shelters began filling up overnight. Local officials insisted they had not been informed in advance, which only fueled the anger of residents who felt blindsided. Meetings erupted into shouting matches between councillors and members of the public. In one town hall session, a resident stood up and demanded, "If the government thinks we can handle this, why didn't they give us a choice?" Richard Tice, meanwhile, seemed unfazed by the growing tension. He doubled down in interviews, accusing Labour and the Lib Dems of hypocrisy. "If they believe in their policies," he said, "they should be the first to live by them. My move simply ensures fairness." His words were designed to cut deep, not just at Starmer, but at every local leader now grappling with the political and logistical storm that had landed on their doorstep. In Parliament, the exchange spilled into fiery debate. Opposition benches accused Tice of stoking division and exploiting a humanitarian crisis. Conservative MPs, sensing an opportunity to weaken Labour further, avoided outright condemnation and instead framed the situation as a test of Labour's leadership under pressure. Every word spoken in the chamber was being broadcast and dissected by the media, adding to the relentless scrutiny on Starmer. The King's name began circulating quietly in political circles. While no official statement had been made, palace insiders hinted that the monarch was monitoring the situation closely. There were whispers that the king was privately concerned about the breakdown in political decorum and the way live television had become a battlefield for stunts rather than genuine governance. But for now, he remained silent, perhaps waiting for the storm to either escalate or pass before making his move. On the streets, the public mood was a volatile mix of sympathy, anger, and confusion. Migrant families, many of whom had endured dangerous journeys to reach safety, found themselves caught in the centre of a political spectacle. Volunteers from charities worked tirelessly to provide aid, but even their efforts were met with suspicion by some locals, who saw the arrivals as a direct result of political gamesmanship. Rumours began to swirl that further relocations were planned, not just to Labour strongholds, but to the constituencies of prominent MPs who had vocally supported immigration policies. Social media platforms became battlegrounds. Clips from the debate racked up millions of views. Memes mocking Starmer's reaction spread alongside videos showing buses arriving at council buildings. The polarising effect was unmistakable. Some saw Tice as a hero standing up against political double standards, while others saw him as a manipulator willing to sacrifice the well-being of vulnerable people for a few moments of televised glory. The tension reached a new level when reports emerged that some Labour councils were refusing to accommodate the arrivals. Officials cited safety concerns, lack of resources, and the absence of prior agreements. Tice seized on these refusals, accusing the councils of proving his point, that they were happy to preach about open arms until the responsibility landed in their own backyards. The debate was no longer about immigration policy alone. It had become a raw, unfiltered test of political integrity. And yet, beneath all the headlines and noise, a more dangerous undercurrent was forming. Political insiders claimed that what happened on live TV was not an impulsive act, but the first step in a larger strategy. If true, it meant that the clash between Starmer and Tice was only beginning, and the next move could shake the country in ways far more profound than a single televised moment ever could. By the third day, the situation had spiralled far beyond a televised exchange. The migrant relocations were no longer just a headline. They were a living, unfolding crisis in dozens of communities. Labour and Lib Dem councils were scrambling to respond, issuing conflicting statements that only deepened the confusion. Some promised to support the arrivals as best they could, while others openly resisted, refusing to allocate housing or resources. The split revealed deep cracks in party unity, cracks that Richard Tice exploited with surgical precision. In a press conference that drew massive media attention, Tice unveiled documents that he claimed proved a pattern of hypocrisy. According to him, internal communications from certain councils showed that they had been lobbying against receiving migrants even as they publicly supported open immigration policies. These people speak one language in front of cameras, Tice said sharply, and another behind closed doors. The room erupted in a frenzy of shouted questions, but Tice simply walked away, leaving the accusations hanging in the air like a political guillotine. For Starmer, the pressure was now suffocating. His attempts to steer the conversation toward broader policy goals were drowned out by relentless questions about his party's handling of the migrant issue. Each appearance in Parliament turned into a trial by fire. Conservative MPs baited him with sarcastic jabs, while Reform UK members hammered away at the same point. If Labour's policies were fair, why was their implementation met with resistance in Labour's own backyard? Protests began to swell outside key government buildings. In some cities, demonstrators gathered in support of the migrants, holding banners that read, "Welcome here," and "Refugees are human too." In others, crowds rallied against what they saw as unfair imposition, carrying placards demanding "Put Britain first" and "Stop political games." The division was stark, and the tension between opposing groups often boiled over into heated confrontations. Police presence increased, their lines standing like silent walls between rival crowds. Internationally, the story was gaining traction. Foreign media networks ran extended segments on the unusual political tactic of physically relocating migrants to opposition-controlled areas. Human rights organisations condemned the practice as weaponising human lives, while certain foreign politicians praised it as a brutal but effective way to expose double standards. The UK's image on the global stage was now tangled in a messy web of domestic political warfare and humanitarian concerns. Behind closed doors, Labour strategists were working frantically to regain control of the narrative. Some urged Starmer to confront Tice directly in another televised debate, to hit back with force and turn the tables. Others warned that any further public clashes would only play into Tice's hands, giving him the spotlight he seemed to thrive on. Meanwhile, internal leaks suggested that Starmer's leadership team was split on whether to demand the immediate return of the migrants to their original housing or to quietly absorb them and attempt to shift public focus elsewhere. But Tice was not finished. In a cryptic late-night post on social media, he hinted at a phase 2 of his plan. He wrote only 3 words: "Next list ready." The statement sent a shiver through political circles. Speculation exploded. Was he planning another round of relocations? Would this list target even more politically sensitive areas? The lack of detail only heightened the suspense, keeping Starmer and his allies on edge. The king, still silent, was reportedly receiving daily briefings on the matter. Advisors close to the palace warned that the longer the crisis dragged on, the greater the risk of public unrest spreading beyond control. There were whispers that a royal intervention could be imminent, though no one knew whether it would take the form of a speech, a private meeting, or something more symbolic. By nightfall, one thing was clear. This was no longer a skirmish. It was an escalating battle that had crossed from politics into the daily lives of ordinary citizens, and it showed no signs of slowing down. The migrants, caught in the middle of a power struggle they had no part in creating, were becoming both symbols and victims of a conflict that was as much about political survival as it was about policy. The stage was set for a confrontation that could determine not just the fates of the individuals involved, but the trajectory of Britain's political landscape for years to come. The 4th day dawned under a heavy sky, as if even the weather sensed the nation's unease. Britain was now gripped by a crisis that had begun as a live television ambush, but had evolved into a political earthquake shaking every corner of the country. The question on everyone's lips was the same: what would happen next? The streets were tense, the air thick with expectation, and the silence from the king could not last much longer. Just after midday, the answer came. The palace announced an unscheduled national address. Within minutes, television and radio stations cleared their schedules. People stopped what they were doing. Shopkeepers turned up the volume on their sets. Office workers gathered around screens, and families sat silently in their living rooms. When the king appeared, his face was solemn but resolute. His opening words cut through the noise of the past days. "Britain is built on principles of fairness, decency, and unity," he began. "And those principles are now under strain." He did not name Richard Tice or Keir Starmer directly, but the message was unmistakable. The king condemned the use of human beings as tools in political disputes, warning that such tactics risked tearing at the fabric of our society. He called for immediate dialogue, for transparency, and for an end to actions that divide rather than heal. His tone was measured, but the underlying force of his words carried a weight that could not be ignored. The reaction was instantaneous. Supporters of the migrants and critics of Tice's strategy saw the address as a moral rebuke. Tice's allies, however, claimed the king was stepping beyond his role, accusing him of indirectly siding with Labour. Starmer seized the opportunity, praising the king's call for unity and pledging to work toward a resolution. Yet to many, his words sounded reactive, as though he was still playing catch-up. Then came the shock. Hours after the king's speech, Richard Tice appeared in front of the press, flanked by folders and documents. With cameras flashing, he revealed the so-called next list, a set of new locations where, he claimed, further migrant relocations would take place. The list included not only additional Labour and Lib Dem councils, but also key constituencies of high-profile government ministers. His reasoning was clear. If the people making these decisions believe in them, they should feel their impact firsthand. The announcement was a political grenade. Starmer's team scrambled to verify the claims, unsure whether Tice was bluffing or already in motion. The councils named on the list were equally stunned, many issuing panicked statements insisting they had no capacity for new arrivals. Tice, however, seemed unfazed, smiling faintly as he walked away from the podium, leaving a trail of speculation in his wake. The streets erupted again that night. In some towns, residents gathered with signs welcoming the migrants, determined to show compassion despite the political theatre. In others, protests swelled against what was seen as a deliberate attempt to strain resources and fuel division. Police forces were stretched thin, balancing the need to maintain order with the growing risk of violent clashes. As midnight approached, rumours began to swirl that buses had already been dispatched to some of the new locations. Videos began appearing online, grainy clips of vehicles moving under the cover of darkness, escorted by unmarked cars. Whether these were real relocations or staged recordings was impossible to tell, but the effect was the same. Anxiety surged and speculation ran wild. By dawn, Britain was no closer to resolution. The king's intervention had raised the stakes, Tice's next list had fanned the flames, and Starmer remained under siege, struggling to wrest control of the narrative. The crisis had transcended party politics, morphing into a test of leadership, resilience, and national identity. And so the nation stood on the edge. Would this be remembered as the moment Britain confronted its divisions and healed, or the point where the rifts deepened beyond repair? No one could say. The only certainty was that the game between Tice and Starmer was far from over, and the next move, whenever it came, could change everything.